Добрий ранок, триває 107-й день.
Good morning. This is 107th day of the Ukrainian resistance. I'm Vasily for the Ukrainian Mediacenter, and we start the day with the interview with Mariana Oleskiv, the head of the state agency for the promotion of tourism. So we'll discuss tourism with Mariana. Good morning. So my first question to you is, can tourism happen in Ukraine, especially in the context of war? Well, tourism as an industry has always played an important role in the Ukrainian economy. So tourism is an industry that Ukraine needs to revive, and this is a factor that has wide-reaching ramifications with a number of other industries. We can't call the movements of people these days tourism, but we still have the hospitality industry in place, and it operated during the hostilities, even in Kyiv and elsewhere. In the first few months, we've seen a massive movement of internally displaced people fleeing conflict areas for safer areas, and we see a rapid increase in the tourist fees. And this is the fee people pay when they stay in hotel, motels, or other accommodation facilities. The restaurant industry changed gears to feed the IDPs, to feed the army and other people. So today, the question all the industry is asking themselves is, how do we revive domestic travel, as they are important for the communities and all the people involved in the economic supply chain. So we are engaging with the tourist operators to organize such trips for Ukrainians to a number of locations which are historical, cultural, and of educational value. Well, the revival of tourism isn't only about the hard numbers, but also about the attitudes. Can I take leisure whilst the war is raging? This is what Ukrainian people are asking themselves. How do we tackle that? This is a very difficult question to answer, as it's hard on the people to cross the threshold. But one of the US presidents, and my memory fails me to recall the name, he was playing golf during the war, and he was asked, how can you be now playing golf when the country is at war? And his response was that if I can distract myself and play golf, then a lot of ideas come to my head. And this is my way of doing more to help my country win the war. And the idea of land lease was conceived as one of the top officials was taking a break. So we all need a chance to reboot ourselves. We're all exhausted as a country. We are suffering from the post-traumatic syndrome, and we need to find ways to unwind. And I was visiting the resorts in Lviv region, such as Morshin, Truskavets, and we looked into the facilities that can help the veterans, the injured, the people who've been afflicted by the war could go to recover. People who sustained trauma need to have a chance to recover before they can go back to their usual way of life. So they need to go through the mental and psychological rehabilitation best in a natural environment. So you were right that this is not an easy decision to make, so we need to communicate it clearly. Where will Ukrainians go to rest? There are few locations that are receiving tourists these days. These are the western regions of the country as well as the central regions. We cannot open a tourist season in the south as much territory is under Russian occupation. Much territory is now the area of operations. Fine. If you could give us an understanding of the tourist industry overall. So the tourist fees have hiked in Kyiv, in Lviv, but there are other operators, those organizing trips abroad, some other vectors of tourism as business. How is the industry faring overall? Well, the tourism industry as such is hard pressed, as tourism is one of the first industry to be hit hard in times of economic crisis or recession, to say less about the war or the hostilities. Earlier in COVID times, we thought we were going through the worst patch ever, but now with the war, we are in a true predicament which exacerbated the plight of the industry. The tourist operators and tourist agents were hit first as they're out of work. These days, the two operators of domestic tourism are beginning to relaunch their operations. So one such tour operator in the western part of Ukraine is operating at 30% of last year's capacity. That's as much for domestic tourism. We don't have any tourists traveling into Ukraine, with the exception of tourism international organizations which need a certain tourist services, but the percentage is lower compared to the domestic tourism. The same pertains to tourist agencies. There are no critical, the tourism abroad is not a critical import, so the tour agents cannot organize such tours. The demand is minimum for such tours. So we're developing a common action plan to revive the industry. These are rehabilitation programs with the support of the International Foundation for the servicemen, for children, for women, as well as certain programs to help provide institutional support to the industry. We will need to draw on international assistance as the Ukrainian budget is servicing the needs of the army and critical and social infrastructure. What are the prospects for tourism after our victory? What's bound to change? The nature of tourism is bound to change. And looking at other countries, we know that in the 5-10 years horizon, the tourism is set to grow, and Ukraine will grow in its popularity as a tourist destination. But security will be the key concern in the post-war years, and this should be our key message that we need to communicate. Many people will want to go to the battlefields, to the sites of valor of the Ukrainian people, to the sites of grief of the Ukrainian people. And now we're working with the stakeholders to mark, organize such sites, and this will be memorial tourism both for domestic and foreign tourists. Well, if we're talking about the post-war tourism, Ukrainians will want to go to the seaside and may find themselves close to the Russian tourists at the same place. How do we deal with that? I think it will be settled automatically anyway, as surely Ukrainians and Russians will not be put up in the same hotels. Let's believe for the future. Let's hope the Russian Empire as such will collapse, and Ukrainians will play an instrumental role in the demise of the empire, and that will be the way to solve the problem, as once had happened when the Nazi regime had repented and the Nazi Germany evolved into the modern Germany, and we enjoy talking and spending leisure with Germans. But for the shorter time perspective, Ukrainians wouldn't want to stay in the same facilities with the Russians, as it is fraught with conflict. Such precedents have happened in Turkey, in Egypt. Early on, the number of tourists from Russia has declined drastically. All the countries are considering alternative markets to replace Russian markets because of the logistics and economic recession. There are countries that are still receiving Russians, and Ukrainians are opting out of those countries, but this is definitely an important consideration. I heard that Russia will be stricken off the Global Tourist Organization. Is this accurate? Yes, Russia was expelled from the World Tourist Organization in the early days of war. We started a very active international campaign so that the countries would sever cooperation ties with Russia, making sure Russia is banned from the international tourist community. There was the emergency session of the association where Russia was banned, most countries voting in favor. And today we see Russia losing its platform for international communication, international arrangements, having sustained severe reputational losses. This wasn't an easy making, as a number of African and Asian countries were arguing that tourism isn't about territorial integrity or human rights, it's a separate matter that is just about peace and something good. We countered the argument, saying that that annexation of Crimea happened, and this was a tourist destination of Ukraine, and it was converted into a military base. Other tourist destinations in Ukraine were occupied. Currently in the south of Ukraine, such as Kirillivka, where 18 local government staff members were abducted, and this is a way to disrupt tourism in Ukraine and globally too, as there are a lot of processes that have hit the tourism hard with the beginning war with the Russian aggression. Looking on the upside, it's that Russians cannot book housing through Airbnb, so if they're Russian nationals, they're banned. And the same doesn't happen in Russia. Hotels in Russia aren't don't have the access to the booking platforms such as Expedia, Booking.com, Hotels.com, and other international platforms. The other good news we received last week was that Marriott is fully withdrawing from Russia and taking its brand with it. And other international brands, together with Marriott, have seized their investments in Russia and are now pulling out. I hope that happens. We talked to Mariana Oleskiv, the head of the State Agency for the Development of Tourism, but we still have a question from the audience, so please hang on with us. Hi, this is Ola Zub. I happen to be in Lviv. I have this question for you. There's so-called military tourism or post-conflict tourism, and this calls for the visits to the area of hostilities. Usually, those tourists are wealthy. They would come and take a selfie on the ruins and look cool, but also it's a chance for Ukraine now that Ukrainian presence in the global information field is receding. We can use this as an opportunity to relay the atrocity crimes committed in Ukraine, the hostilities that took place in Ukraine, to stay on the radar in the world. So, how do you feel about this kind of tourism? It's there. We can confirm that this is happening. We have some tourist operators receiving such requests. Usually people are coming with a humanitarian mission, bringing in humanitarian relief, helping as volunteers. I don't think this would be right to promote Ukraine as a destination for military tourism, because then it would be difficult to reverse the image. We'd like to try to accumulate the demand for tourism in Ukraine and, yes, show the impact of the war, but offset that with demonstrating the beauty of our country and the wonderful infrastructure we have to host the tourists, as now people are seeing a lot of heartbreaking footage of the devastation in Ukraine, and we need to counter that with showing the beauty of Ukraine and raise interest to Ukraine in that way. What about the operators prepared to receive tourists in Ukraine? Uh, do they have the same legal footing as in peacetime, or has anything changed? No, they are on the same legal footing. If it's a domestic operator, they don't need to get a license. They just need to give us a notification that they are setting up their operation and be licensed when the marshal's law comes to the end. Thank you very much. And let's thank Mariana Oleskiv, the head of the State Agency for the Development of Tourism. So we discussed tourism in Ukraine for now and for the future. The next briefing is coming up at 11:30. We'll talk to Andriy Dikun, the head of the All Ukrainian Agrarian Council.